Hello and welcome to our week of celebrating Indie Author Week UK in a series of videos that we call Wine and a Book. Good evening and welcome to our last session for Wine and a Book for 2023, and cheers. This is part of Indie Author Week and celebrating the role of independent authors and publishers. And tonight is a book that I had an involvement with, and it's written by my grandmother, so it's appropriate, and it's also appropriate because we hold the stock for this book if anybody wants to purchase it. It's called Sophie, an Edwardian Childhood, and my grandmother was born Sophie Blair Leighton, and then she became Lady Sophie Harding, or Lady Harding. I'm not quite sure what the etiquette is of how you refer to her. Lady Harding, but she, SHBH was how she signed herself, Sophie Helen Blair Harding. And she was the daughter of Edmund Blair Leighton, who painted the signing of the register, which has her hand in it, but the body of her beautiful cousin. And she wrote this book as a collection of memories for us as grandchildren. And it was then printed on a photocopier, and we got... all six of us got copies of it, and it was black and white with illustrations that she did. So that's an example of an illustration that she did. She was an artist as well, but then learned cooking rather than... She left the Slade and went to a cookery school when she got engaged to my grandfather. My aunt always wanted to turn the book into a properly printed, published book, because the stories that she told were stories of being a child in the Edwardian era and what life was like there, and the detail that she gives is really, really fascinating. But she never managed to do that. But her husband, my uncle, in her memory and in the memory of his mother-in-law, paid for the book to be edited and designed and printed, and it's in hardback, and it's a beautiful production. The printing is gorgeous and the editing is largely good. They did come up with a very strange idea, which was that this is a book for children. I don't believe that it is a book for children. I think it's a book for adult children, or adults who are interested in what it was like to be a child in times that we can't even begin to imagine. Anyway, I'm going to read a bit about what it was like to be a child in Bedford Park in London in the 1910s. In Bedford Park, as elsewhere in London in those days, there were many street sounds which are now no longer heard, and indeed sights which are no longer seen. Firstly, of course, was the sight and sound of horses on the street. Most tradesmen, that is, shopkeepers or their employees, would come on foot to the back door to deliver or take orders once or even twice a day. But milk was delivered daily on a special float drawn by a patient horse. When it stopped, the milkman always shouted, "Milko!" to announce his wares. Housewives or domestics would issue from the houses with jugs, and he would ladle milk into the jugs from a large brass churn on the float. The horse would then quietly move on to the next house without being told. Sometimes the clip-clop of horses was followed by a scrubbing sound which echoed outside Papa's studio. Looking out, we saw a diminutive man with a dustpan and brush retrieving the horse droppings for the benefit of his garden. I never discovered where he lived, but my father said that he was a well-known comic music hall artist known as Little Titch. I once saw the entire road covered in straw to a depth of about 8 inches. I was very mystified by this until I was told that someone was ill and that the straw was used to deaden the sound of horse-drawn traffic with its iron-covered wheels and iron-shod hooves. On the main roads, with all the horse traffic, the surface became very messy. There were certain crossing places with a raised surface, so they could be cleared for pedestrians, particularly necessary at a time when the fashion was for skirts, which virtually swept the floor. And these main crossings were each manned by a sweeper, who expected a penny for his work. As I mentioned before, I was usually permitted to put the penny into his outstretched hand. When horse-drawn buses were being phased out, my father said I should be taken on the top of one so I would remember what they were like. They were double-deckers with an external stair at the back. There was no roof, so if it was raining, a sort of waterproof cover was provided to protect the passengers. This looked a bit like a doormat with oilcloth on the outer side and a harsh flannel lining. It was held in place by eyelets, which fitted over 2 brass pegs, one on the side of the bus and another on the seat. The seats had backs and were made of horizontal slats of varnished timber, and she drew that. In the streets we often saw and heard people selling things. The man who sold muffins walked along clanging a large bell, selling his wares from a big wooden tray covered in green baize, which he carried on his head. I never tasted one of his muffins, but I believe that he had a lively trade. One man went the rounds with baked potatoes and another with hot chestnuts, and the sound of the girl who sang, "Oh, buy my sweet lavender," could not be resisted. The visits of the hurdy-gurdy man were great fun. His tiny monkey in a bright red coat held out a hat for pennies while his master turned the handle of his music box. I was also very interested in the sight of an enormous brown bear with a collar and chain, walking on his hind legs beside a man who was waving a collecting box. Something you don't see in the street nowadays is the twinkle of metal hairpins scattered over the pavement. It was the fashion during my childhood for ladies to pile masses of hair on the top of their heads or in a chignon, a twisted bun, at the base of the neck, and, of course, many pins were required to keep these styles in place. The hairpins, which escaped in large numbers from the coiffures of passing women, were mainly bronze or black and about 4 inches long. It was good fun on a walk to keep a tally and see who could spot the greatest number. The best hunting grounds were the small square beds of a tree-lined pavement. At dusk, the lamplighter carried around his pole, on which he kept a hooded flame. He would push it up through a hole in the lamp, automatically turning on the gas and lighting it in one movement. The roads were quite well lit at crossroads, but not so well elsewhere. I do not recall being conscious of the smell of gas, but might well not have noticed it, because our houses too were all lit by gas. And there are similar stories of a different world, a different life, a different way of being. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us for this week, and we both hope that the information or the experiences that we've had with getting our books into print in different ways and different forms makes some sort of input into any thinking that you might have, and that there has been something that you can take away from these, as well as our very good wishes and cheers.